This is Ryan Fowler right here on The Game here in Tuscaloosa and Tide 102.9 and 100.9 as we're live at SEC Media Days. Our coverage presented by New Floors to go. Let's go with National College Football writer George Schroeder. Good to see you here in Atlanta. We always talk on the phone. It's good to see you in person.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's different to be in Atlanta rather than Hoover, but and it's taking us all a while to figure out the new ways around the Omni Hotel and the College Football Hall of Fame, but it's kind of a cool experience.
It is, and it's a little bit unique, and I think we as humans get in this habit, going to Hoover. It's almost become a trade name with SEC Media Days, and now we're going to have to get used to saying Atlanta for 1 year, and then we'll be Hoover next year. I'm
waiting for the guy from the Hoover Chamber of Commerce to ask a question in the main room. I kid a little bit, but yeah, no, we all get used to it, and we know kind of the places we go in Hoover to eat, and we know, you know the mall, and I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with it. It's all new in downtown Atlanta to most of us, even those of us who've covered, SEC title games or last year the national title game or other events in Atlanta. It's different to be sort of here on this kind of a media day rhythm. I'll personally like it when it's back in Hoover. But I know they've got plans to think about moving it around, and so I don't think we're going to find it in one spot for years and years and years and years like it's been, up until now. As we enter this SEC Media Days, get things started, I know we've got Jimbo Fisher already talking, Stoops later on, Coach O a little bit later on, but just maybe the big thing that you think will come out of this SEC Media Days, something that you're focused on that you're thinking about. Well, I don't know what's going to come out of it. Look, the number one storyline going into this season is the Alabama quarterback situation, but that's not going to get resolved here, or certainly not announced here by Nick Saban or any of his well-drilled players who aren't going to say anything. So, what's the biggest storyline? I think probably beyond that, it's all the new faces in the coaches' chairs, and how that will, and we don't know, but how that alters sort of the chemistry and the dynamics within the league. I think there were some very good coaching hires. Obviously, the home run hire everybody thinks is Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. But you drop him into the SEC West, it's a tough place with Alabama and Auburn, and on and on and on. But Alabama and Auburn currently sort of at the top of the heap there. A&M's a place with all sorts of resources. They've always felt like that, especially these last 5 or 6 years when they've brought their facilities up to par, that they have everything it takes to win a national title and to compete at the top of college football, except maybe the elite level coach. Now they think they have that. So you've got him, you've got Dan Mullen moving from Mississippi State to Florida, a proven winner, and what he did at Mississippi State is as impressive a job as anybody around the country, quite frankly. I mean, I know what their record was against top 25 opponents. I also know it's tough to win at Mississippi State. You've got other new guys around the league. I think that is how does that change things? And again, that all comes back to, by the way, the fact that every school in the league has turned his head coach over at least twice since Nick Saban arrived, except for A&M and Missouri, who've only been in the league since 2012, and they've both done it once. So the Sabanization of the league, or the Saban factor, has really impacted the league's coaches, and we see a bunch of new coaches now this year in the league. And how does that change things, if it does? All right, let's go back to Florida here for a couple of minutes. In your opinion, can they close the gap, and how soon can they close the gap on Georgia? Yes, because they have tremendous resources. They've got, I think they're one of those places that got a little stale in facilities for a while. And with Scott Strickland as the AD, with Dan Mullen as a coach, after you've been stale on the field for a while, you sort of get the impetus from everybody to sort of push together and build the facilities you need and have the resources committed to the program that you need. And I think Dan Mullen is a whale of a coach, as I was referencing a minute ago. And on the field, what the strengths that he brings as an offensive mind and as a developer of quarterbacks fit nicely into the deficits we've seen from that program. Their defenses have been routinely good these last 5, 6, 7 years. Their offenses have been routinely horrendous, and they've really struggled at quarterback, with the exception of when Will Grier was starting to get going for them. And then, of course, he had the year-long suspension, and now he's at West Virginia as a Heisman candidate. I think Dan Mullen, who has developed quarterbacks and knows how to score points, will really help them. Can they close the gap on Georgia? Yeah. I mean, are they going to do it this year? I don't know. I think Georgia takes a step back this year. That said, they're still the class of the East, I think. So I don't anticipate this year, but I think Florida's it's a top 10 job. There's a reason, so Georgia also is a top 10 job. So yeah, they can close the gap. I expect they will, but not this year.
All right, so you said something that really grabbed our attention because now we've developed this Georgia-Alabama rivalry a little bit. You think Georgia takes a step back. How far is back?
Well, they lost a lot of people, and how far is back may not play out on the field because the SEC East, despite what I just said about Florida, is not nearly as good as the SEC West. And Georgia is a lot better than everybody else in the East at this point. And so I'm not sure that we're going to see that reflected in the record. I think when we may see it is if and when they were to get to Atlanta and they faced an Alabama or an Auburn, that might be where you see it. So I don't really know exactly what that means in terms of a record. But I just think it's tough to replace all those personnel. Kirby Smart's doing a tremendous job of building that program. He's recruiting like nobody's business, but it's still year 3. And they were probably a year ahead or 2 or 3 years ahead of, let's put this way, I bet you if you asked him and you put truth serum in him, because you'd have to do that, he would say, I like where we are kind of depth-wise as a program better than I did year 1, but we still got a ways to go. And they're not to the place where, like Alabama replaces players like sharks replace teeth. I don't think Georgia's quite there yet. So I realize that I didn't give you a great answer, but I'm not sure what the great answer is. I think they had a charmed season last year. They were really good. They were worthy of winning the national title. Could easily have won it. Could also have lost in the Rose Bowl, as far as that goes. Could have also lost in the SEC title game to a team they'd already lost to. But they had that great year, and everything fell right up until that last play. Why is that going to happen again this year with all the personnel losses? And I just sort of, maybe it's just human nature. I just say I think they take a step back.
Well, and then I also get to thinking, I was a huge fan of Mark Richt, high character guy. We featured him a lot in Tuscaloosa. He was always a guy that, he talked about his faith as often. I guess I respect being in that position, and it's like Bobby Bowden. I always have respect for what he was able to stand for, because it's not easy at a public institution to be able to, stand on your faith. So Mark Richt was one of my favorite coaches in the league. And then I look back and I go, they fired him. 15 years, averaged 10 wins a season. So if they take a step back, let's say they drop back 9-3 in regular season, how quick does, not hot, but how quick will you have some chirping in Athens, and then you follow it up and see how quick you can get back there?
Let me be clear, I'm not predicting a 9-3 regular season. I think their schedule falls to where they'll win 10 or 11 games. And as much as I also respect Mark Richt, and I really do, for all the reasons you talked about, I think he wanted to run the program the right way, and I think it stemmed from his faith, and I appreciate that. And you're right, they averaged 10 wins a year, but they had slid in the last 4 or 5 years just a notch. They had gotten really close. I mean, in 2012, they could have won the whole thing. Coulda, woulda, shoulda beat Bama here in the SEC title game. Didn't, and they took a step down after that point. It's kind of like they mirrored anybody else who's challenged Nick Saban during his career. It's a little bit like Les Miles was right there, and at a certain point it started sliding for them. Now, it didn't slide very far for Georgia, but it slid just enough to where things got stale, and they went and decided it was time to cut ties with him. All that said, if they were to go 9-3, I think the glow from last year works fine for them. But you don't want to do it a couple years in a row, I think would be my answer. The honeymoon will be over real fast if they're not able to sustain things. I suspect they'll have a shot to sustain things because Kirby is really recruited really, really well.
So we're talking to George Schroeder, USA Today, usatoday.com, USA Today paper. You know, I'm here to Hilton, and right there on the counter, USA Today. So it's the great newspaper, a lot of sports content if you love sports. George, let's go back here to this Alabama Jalen Hurts, because that seems to be a lot of the focus, even from a lot of the national guys. Obviously, you brought it up, and I didn't even ask you about it, how intriguing that conversation really is.
I think it's a little less intriguing with one of the NCAA rule changes that came during the summer. And obviously your listeners know about this, but the somewhat unexpected move by the NCAA to allow people to play as many as 4 games, or in as many as 4 games, and still redshirt a season, I think changes things a little bit potentially, because I'm like a lot of other people. I think probably Tua is going to end up with the job. And so you immediately thought, especially based on the comments of Jalen's father to Bleacher Report sometime during the offseason, that, well, he'll end up transferring away. And then you had people talking about, well, apparently he could graduate in December, and so maybe he would stay and then go and be immediately eligible. I don't know how realistic that was. I think that's a whole lot more realistic if you can play in 4 games and still redshirt, still keep that season, preserve that season of eligibility. So if he were to not win the job, I think he's less likely to be, you know, on somebody's practice squad at another school in September. He may still be somewhere else next spring or not, but I think it takes the competition deeper into the season, preserves some options for Jalen Hurts, and I think it allows Nick Saban to, unless there's just a clear-cut guy, either one, to take it into the season too. I think that rule change really benefits Alabama in this specific instance in 2018.
All right, so, and I know this is the middle of July. What's your pick? Do you think Tua wins the job? Do you think Jalen wins the job?
I think Tua wins the job, but here's the caveat. What we've seen of Tua in reality, other than a few mop-ups, is 1 inconsistent half and 1 inconsistent overtime. I mean, we've seen him, you know, for what, 35 minutes, right, of actual action against elite competition, and he was really inconsistent. Made some great plays, made some terrible plays, and although I think there'll be some development that's happened during the offseason, I know it was hampered a little bit by the hand injury, I think he wins the job, and I do think there'll be some risks that get taken that wouldn't have been taken with Jalen that won't work out. I don't think it'll matter as much, because Alabama's going to beat most of the teams on the schedule with superior talent. But I think if he develops like people think he will, his potential is off the charts, and there's a chance for Alabama to have a dynamic quarterback, the likes of which they haven't had under Saban, which, when you consider all the talent around the quarterback, you know, add a guy like a Deshaun Watson or a Baker Mayfield, or if Tua were somebody like that, to that talent and see what happens. And I think that's what's so tantalizing for Nick Saban and his coaching staff, is if we do that, but the other thing is the formula has worked to have guys who are very, very careful and fastidious and don't put you into problem situations and everything else. And Jalen, who's a tremendous weapon in his own right, has been that kind of guy too. So I'm not waffling. It's going to be Tua, assuming everybody's healthy. But I do think there's some risk reward that they have to think about, and do we really need that? I think they did need it against the most elite competition last year. I think at Auburn they could have used a Tua. I'm not saying he was ready, but they could have used that kind of skill set and would have changed the game potentially. Against Georgia, clearly they needed that. Had they played Oklahoma, there's no question in my mind with that offense they would have needed somebody to keep up. And so I don't think it matters against most of the schedule, and I'm rambling on and on and on here. I think it matters when they hit the elite opponents.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think we credit, you know, I hear the 26-2 from Jalen Hurts, okay? And that's nothing to take anything away from Jalen, but I think you could plug a lot of quarterbacks in, and let's say that you could go, I don't know, 23, 24 wins. When you look at having superior talent, it does not take a great quarterback to win the game, because they're not asking their quarterback to be a superstar, which changes the things. If you've got a Tua Tagovailoa, we're now talking about Alabama with one of these elite quarterbacks. How dangerous can this team really be?
That's right, and to your point, they have plugged in a lot of guys, just like you're talking about. They haven't had that kind of quarterback, let's be honest. And I'm not trying to downplay any of the talented kids they've had playing quarterback, but they haven't had that dynamic. They haven't had the Mariota. They haven't had the, he's obviously the easy comparison, and they haven't had anybody close to a Deshaun Watson. They haven't had a guy who developed into what I mentioned Baker Mayfield developed into over the course of his career. And that's the thing. If Tua develops into this kind of a quarterback, and we see that potential in his talent, doesn't mean he's going to get there. Let's be honest. And it doesn't mean that even if he gets there, that there won't be some ups and downs along the way, which, by the way, against the one thing about Alabama is they can afford to have those ups and downs of an inconsistent quarterback against most of the schedule. But, yeah, your point is well made. Jalen Hurts, 26-2, whatever the record is as a starter, frankly, did everything he could to win a national title game, but Deshaun Watson had time left and did him one better, was tremendous for them. But you're right, you can roll a bunch of guys out there at Alabama and win a bunch of games because that's what they've done. And so it's just tantalizing to see what could be if Tua is one of those guys or becomes one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not trying to take this the wrong way, but I look at a guy like Blake Sims, okay, I mean, who was a backup running back on a scout team and a scout team wide receiver and a backup quarterback, and he led that team to a college football playoff appearance because of Amari Cooper on the outside the historic year. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Blake Sims. I'm just trying to call it the way I see it, and I know I'm going to be wrapping up in a second, but you make an excellent point.
It just is. I mean, Alabama has been the exception to the rule in college football, which is this. In today's world, it's never been more important to have a dynamic player at quarterback if you want to succeed at the highest level. That is the rule and has been for everybody not named Alabama. And they've succeeded despite that because they've routinely stacked the most talent that any program's seen since USC in the mid-2000s. And they've replaced that talent like shark's teeth, I think I mentioned a little while ago. So they've been able to do things with quarterback, without the same type of player at quarterback that some of the other programs had and also required. That said, there's two things. One, it's going to be tremendous to see what kind of level they can reach if and when they have that kind of guy at quarterback, and we all think maybe that's Tua. Two, I think they needed that guy to get over the hump last year. They needed that kind of quarterback to get there. Had they not had Tua waiting in the wings, Georgia's your national champion right now, and probably going away. It wouldn't have been, an overtime thriller. It was 13-0 at halftime, and it might have ended up, 23-7 or something like that. I mean, we all saw the first half. And so I think it's just, I've said this a couple times, I think we're all fascinated to watch what happens. If Tua is who we think he can become, what's Alabama like with that kind of a guy at quarterback?
A lot of people in Tuscaloosa are smiling, George, over those comments. It's a big question, but it's a lot of fun to talk about it. USA Today national college football writer. Find him on the Twitter account, George Schroeder. Go check out his work, USA Today, his coverage of SEC Media Days. George, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I enjoyed it. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, absolutely. We appreciate the conversation. We'll continue with more of the game here on Tide 102.9 and 100.9, the home of Alabama Crimson Tide Sports.